What should have been the happiest moment of Forrest's life turns into a brutal emotional collapse almost instantly. Because the second he chooses Sheena, his own mother reacts like he has betrayed her. And that is what makes this 90-day fiancé moment so much darker than a normal family argument. This is not just about an engagement. It is not even just about whether Sheena can be trusted. This is about what happens when a son finally tries to choose his own future, and the woman who has always held emotional power over him refuses to let go. Forrest thought proposing to Sheena would prove that their love could survive the chaos. Instead, it detonated every buried tension at once. Molly does not react like a concerned mother struggling with bad news. She reacts like someone losing control. Every word becomes sharper, every insult feels more personal, and every accusation reveals the same painful truth. This was never only about Sheena. This was about what Sheena represents: distance, separation, and the terrifying possibility that Forrest may finally stop orbiting around Molly's approval. That is why this confrontation feels so explosive. On the surface, it looks like a mother trying to protect her son from another mistake. But underneath, it feels like something far more uncomfortable. It feels like a battle over emotional ownership. Forrest believes he is building a life with the woman he loves. Molly acts like that life is being stolen from her. And the moment he refuses to back down, the entire relationship between mother and son begins to crack in a way that can no longer be hidden. What makes this even more intense is that Molly is not entirely wrong to have concerns. Sheena has already damaged trust. There have already been lies, doubts, and enough emotional mess to make anyone question whether this relationship is built to last. But concern and control are not the same thing, and that is exactly where everything starts to fall apart. Because instead of expressing fear like a mother who wants to stay close even when she disagrees, Molly lashes out like someone furious that her power is slipping. She does not just question the engagement, she humiliates it. And that is where Forrest's proposal becomes something much bigger than romance. This ring is not just a promise to Sheena. It is the first real public moment where Forrest says, "This is my life, this is my decision, and I am not asking for permission anymore." The problem is that saying those words is one thing. Living them is another. Because when years of guilt, pressure, and emotional dependence are involved, one act of defiance does not instantly create freedom. It only exposes how hard the real fight is going to be. This is what makes the scene so painful to watch. Forrest finally tries to stand up for himself, but instead of feeling powerful, it feels fragile. He sounds less like a man fully free and more like someone attempting adulthood in real time while still terrified of losing the person who shaped his emotional world. That is the tragedy. He is not just choosing between Molly and Sheena. He is choosing between the safety of an old bond and the uncertainty of becoming his own man. And for someone raised inside this kind of emotional grip, that choice does not feel empowering at first. It feels like heartbreak. By the end of this moment, the real question is no longer whether Molly approves of Sheena. It is whether Forrest is strong enough to survive the guilt that comes after choosing her. Because the loud argument is only the beginning. The real danger starts later. When the shouting stops, the silence sets in, and the old emotional patterns start pulling him back. And that is why this 90-day fiancé blow-up feels so much bigger than engagement drama. It is not just about love. It is about control, loyalty, and whether Forrest can finally break free before the same family cycle destroys everything. What should have been one of the happiest moments in Forrest's life turns into something much darker almost immediately, because the engagement is not received as a celebration at all. It is received like a betrayal. That is the part that makes this story hit harder than a normal reality TV fight. On the surface, this looks like a mother reacting badly to her son, getting engaged, but the deeper damage starts showing the second it becomes clear that this is not really about a ring, or a proposal, or even a single argument about trust. This is about what happens when a son tries to step into his own adult life and the person who has always held emotional power over him, refuses to loosen her grip. Forrest believes he is moving forward with the woman he loves. Molly believes she is trying to save him from another mistake. But the closer you look, the harder it becomes to ignore that her version of protection is soaked in control, fear, and resentment. She does not just dislike Sheena. She seems to hate what Sheena represents, which is distance, separation, and the end of her ability to direct Forrest's choices from the center of his life. That is why the engagement lands like an explosion instead of a milestone. In most relationships, a proposal is supposed to be the point where two people announce that, whatever problems they have, they are choosing each other anyway. Here it does the opposite. It drags every unresolved tension out into the open and forces everyone to stop. Pretending this is just a temporary rough patch. Suddenly, the real question is not whether Forrest and Sheena can work through their issues. The real question is whether Forrest is actually capable of becoming his own man when the cost of doing that might be losing the person who has shaped his emotional world for years. That is what gives this whole conflict its real weight, because the central breakup in this story does not feel romantic at all. The deepest fracture is between mother and son, and the engagement only exposes how unstable that bond already was. By the time this moment happens, there is already damage on every side. Sheena has lied. Before, trust has already been weakened, and Molly has already decided that whatever explanation comes out now cannot possibly be enough. That part matters, because this story would be flatter if Molly had no real reason to worry. She does have a reason. The relationship has not been clean, and Forrest has already shown that he is willing to forgive. Things that would make most people hesitate. But concern is not the same thing as entitlement, and that is where Molly loses whatever moral strength she might have had. Instead of expressing fear, like a mother who wants to stay close to her son even when she disagrees, she lashes out like someone who feels ownership slipping away. Her words are not careful. They are cutting. Her tone is not protective. It is humiliating. She does not just question the engagement, she mocks it. And more than that, she mocks the people inside it, as if disrespect might somehow force reality to bend back into the shape she wants. Forrest is standing in the middle of that storm, and what makes his position so compelling is that he is not entering this as a naturally strong or fully independent person. He does not feel like someone who has been confidently living his own life and simply hit a family disagreement on the way. He feels like someone who has been emotionally managed for so long that even this act of standing up for himself carries the awkwardness of a late rebellion. That is why the proposal means more than romance here. It feels symbolic. It feels like the first public move he has made that says, "This is my life, this is my decision, and I am not asking for permission." The problem is that saying those words and actually living them are two very different things. A lot of people can declare independence in one heated moment. Far fewer can hold that line when guilt, pressure, and emotional history start pushing back. And Molly pushes back immediately. She does not respond like someone trying to make a difficult point land with care. She responds like someone offended by the very idea that the decision could have happened without her approval. That is what sharpens the conflict. If this were only about Sheena's past dishonesty, the conversation might still be painful, but it would remain focused on evidence, risk, and trust. Instead, it spirals into something much more personal, because Molly cannot seem to separate genuine concern from the insult she feels at being displaced. Every sarcastic remark, every dismissive comment, every mocking repetition of Sheena's words reveals the same thing. She is not only reacting to what Sheena has done, she is reacting to the fact that Forrest has chosen to believe Sheena over her. And in Molly's mind, that shift is almost unbearable. Sheena, for her part, becomes the trigger that exposes everything already rotting beneath. The surface. That is an important difference, because it would be easy to flatten her into either innocent victim or obvious villain, and neither version fully explains why this moment becomes so explosive. Sheena has flaws, and the story does not erase them. She has given Molly enough material to distrust her, and that distrust is not invented out of thin air. But the reason Sheena matters so much here is not simply that she lied. It is that her relationship with Forrest forces a deeper, more threatening change. Without her, the unhealthy balance between Molly and Forrest might have continued for years under the comforting disguise of closeness. With her in the picture, that balance becomes impossible to hide. The moment Forrest insists on defending Sheena, he is not only defending a fiancé, he is resisting the structure that has always placed his mother above every other bond in his life. That is why the language in this confrontation matters so much. Molly's criticism is not limited to practical worries about the future. She attacks Forrest's judgment, his strength, and his ability to function as an adult. She talks to him in a way that shrinks him. She treats his attempt at making a grown decision like a childish fantasy that needs to be corrected before it gets out of hand. There is something especially revealing in that, because it shows how deeply she seems to depend on seeing herself as the one who knows best. Once Forrest stops taking that role assignment and starts speaking with his own authority, her response is not sadness first. It is anger. That tells you a lot. When a parent truly believes their child is making a bad choice, there can still be disappointment, worry, or fear. But when the dominant emotional reaction becomes outrage at being defied, control has already entered the room. Forrest senses that, and for once he does not fully retreat from it. He pushes back. He says, his mother's behavior is not how a mother should act, and that line matters more than it may seem at first. It is not just a complaint about tone, it is a challenge to the emotional order that has defined their relationship. He is naming the gap between care and domination, even if he does not phrase it that way. He is saying that love cannot keep looking like this forever. He is saying that if every disagreement turns into mockery, pressure, and emotional punishment, then whatever bond they have is no longer functioning as support. It is functioning as control. The sad thing is that this recognition seems to come to him very late. There is a sense that Forrest has needed this realization for years, but only now. Because another woman stands beside him, does he finally find the nerve to say it aloud. Even then, the victory feels incomplete. That is what makes the whole scene more tragic than triumphant. Forrest does stand up for himself, and on paper that should feel like growth. But his independence still looks fragile, and the script keeps feeding that doubt in subtle ways. He does not sound like someone who has fully separated emotionally from Molly. He sounds like someone trying to do it while still craving her approval. That contradiction sits at the center of everything. He wants to move forward with Sheena, but he also seems devastated by the thought that doing so might cost him his mother's love. In other words, he is not choosing between right and wrong in his own mind. He is choosing between two emotional loyalties that should never have had to compete like this in the first place. That is what makes the engagement feel less like a romantic milestone and more like a loyalty test. Every response pulls the same question into focus. Who gets the final claim on Forrest now? Does he belong to the future he is trying to build with Sheena, or does he remain tied to the emotional system Molly has built around him for years? That is why the argument grows so intense, so fast. It is not a disagreement over judgment alone. It is a forced redistribution of emotional power. Forrest is trying to move his center of gravity, and Molly is reacting as if that movement itself is the injury. The painful irony is that Molly may actually believe she is acting out of love. That is what makes this story stronger than a simple hero and villain setup. She likely does see danger in Sheena. She likely does fear that Forrest will get hurt again. But love becomes distorted when it cannot tolerate autonomy. The moment care starts demanding obedience in exchange for closeness, it stops feeling like safety and starts feeling like a trap. Molly cannot seem to warn Forrest without belittling him, and she cannot express fear without turning it into shame. That is why even her valid points lose force. She may be right that trust has been damaged. She may be right that past behavior matters, but when those truths are weaponized as a way to keep someone emotionally dependent, they stop sounding like wisdom and start sounding like manipulation. And that manipulation gets sharper the moment Forrest tries to set a boundary. When he pushes the conversation toward a choice and makes it clear that support matters if Molly wants to remain close to their lives, the whole emotional structure flips. For years, it seems, Molly has been able to position herself as the authority, the rescuer, the one whose judgment could not be challenged without consequences. Now Forrest is the one issuing the terms, and you can feel how unnatural that sounds inside their relationship. It shocks her, but it also reveals something essential. Forrest has always been easier to manage when he remained uncertain, dependent, and apologetic. The second he starts sounding decisive, Molly does not soften. She escalates. That tells you she is not just struggling with the news of the engagement. She is struggling with the loss of control that the engagement represents. Still, Forrest's assertion does not feel fully stable. When he speaks with force, there is power in it, but there is also strain. He sounds like a man trying on adulthood in real time. And that is both moving and unsettling. It is moving because it suggests growth. It is unsettling because it raises the possibility that this new stance may not hold once the immediate heat dies down. One strong moment does not erase years of conditioning. One confrontation does not dissolve emotional enmeshment. If anything, moments like this often expose how much work has not yet been done. Forrest may have finally said no, but the deeper question is whether he knows how to live with the consequences of saying it. Can he tolerate his mother's disappointment without collapsing into guilt? Can he continue choosing his relationship when the emotional cost stops being dramatic and becomes quiet, chronic, and exhausting? That is the real test, and the story is smart enough not to pretend the answer is obvious. What makes the whole thing even sadder is that the mother-son bond itself still carries real feeling. This is not a story where both people are cold and detached and only acting out of pride. There is love here, but it has become tangled in dependence, fear, and role confusion. Forrest seems to love his mother deeply, perhaps too deeply in the sense that her emotional position in his life still feels dangerously central. Molly seems terrified of losing him, but instead of responding to that fear by respecting the adulthood she claims to doubt, she doubles down on the very behavior that is pushing him away. That is what makes this rupture so painful to watch. Neither of them seems fully equipped to have the relationship they now need. He needs a mother who can step back without turning distance into betrayal. She needs a son who can grow up without treating every boundary like an act of cruelty. Neither one seems fully ready for that shift. And Sheena is standing inside that fracture whether she wants to or not. She is not the whole story, but she becomes the point where everything hidden becomes visible. Her presence forces the relationship between Forrest and Molly to reveal what it really is. That is why this conflict feels bigger than a fiancé trying to win over a difficult future mother-in-law. This is about a family system being challenged from the outside and the emotional chaos that follows when one person inside that system tries, perhaps for the first time, to choose a different life. Forrest tries to hold his ground, and for a brief moment, It almost feels like the balance of power has shifted for good, because he is no longer speaking like a son waiting to be corrected. He is speaking like a man trying to protect the life he has chosen. That shift matters more than any single line in the argument, because Molly has likely spent years believing that no matter how upset Forrest got, no matter how much he resisted in small ways, he would eventually circle back into the same emotional orbit. He would still need her, still trust her judgment over his own, still return to the role she understood best. What makes this engagement so destabilizing is not only that he proposes to Sheena, but that he does so after hearing the warnings, after seeing the disapproval, after knowing exactly how explosive the fallout could be. He does it anyway. In Molly's eyes, that is not just bad judgment. It is a direct rejection of her power. That is why her anger feels so layered. On one level, she is furious with Sheena, because Sheena has become the person through whom Forrest is suddenly making choices she cannot stop. On another level, she is furious with Forrest himself, because he is no longer playing the part she has always relied on him to play. And beneath both of those reactions sits something even more raw, which is grief. Not grief in the clean, healthy sense of a parent accepting that a child is growing up, but grief mixed with resentment, entitlement, and wounded pride. Molly does not react like someone processing a difficult transition. She reacts like someone who believes something has been taken from her. That distinction changes everything, because once love starts speaking the language of possession, every disagreement becomes a threat, and every sign of independence starts looking like abandonment. The most revealing part is that Molly does not merely challenge the relationship. She challenges Forrest's ability to know his own mind. She speaks as if his decision cannot possibly be his unless he has been manipulated into it. That is one of the clearest signs that the problem is larger than simple distrust of Sheena. If Molly truly believed Forrest were an adult capable of choosing badly, she might still be upset, but she would at least acknowledge that he has chosen. Instead, she seems to fall back on the idea that Sheena must be controlling him, influencing him, or bending him into this outcome. In other words, Forrest's agency disappears the moment it produces a result Molly hates. That is such a telling pattern, because it allows her to preserve the fantasy that he would still be aligned with her if he were somehow untouched by outside interference. It protects her from having to face the harder truth, which is that Forrest may be choosing this relationship with open eyes, even if that choice is risky. And the script becomes much stronger when you sit with that contradiction. Molly may honestly see Sheena as dangerous, and the story does not ask us to pretend those fears are entirely irrational. But even when a parent fears the worst, there is still a line between warning someone and denying their personhood. Molly crosses that line repeatedly. She does not simply say, "I think this is a mistake." She talks as though Forrest cannot be trusted. With his own life, she frames him as weak, gullible, and fundamentally incapable of navigating the consequences of his decisions. That kind of language does more than criticize. It traps. It keeps the other person small, because once someone accepts that version of themselves, they become easier to manage forever. Forrest's response to that dynamic is complicated, and that complexity is what keeps the story alive. If he were fully confident, the confrontation would be cleaner, perhaps even less interesting. But he is not. He pushes back, yet he still seems deeply affected by Molly's reaction. Every word she throws at him appears to land somewhere inside him, even when he refuses to give her the victory of backing down. That matters because it suggests his rebellion is real, but incomplete. He is still emotionally reachable through the old channels. He still seems vulnerable to the guilt that has probably shaped this relationship for years. So, While he may sound firmer than before, the audience is left with the uneasy sense that strength in one argument does not guarantee strength when the emotional aftershocks begin.